slight instances, I said that you can't say because you're rich, you put more salt in your soup. Uh,
Yes.
So it means if salt is considered a necessary commodity, you would use it on the basis of necessity, not on the basis of income. Say health services, except for cases of medical tourism, where the rich go to UK and anywhere else, but not under COVID-19. So I guess COVID-19 has destroyed medical tourism. Do you agree with me?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
So carry your
But I think
wahala stay
it
for
will
your country.
continue after the lockdown.
At least it has made everybody to carry a wahala stay for in country. So manage your wahala. So in other words, why I said that is maybe except in the case of medical tourism, but the point here is that health-related expenditure may not be a function of what income. So nobody can pose to be sick and go to lie in a hospital because you have money to spend. You know, when you get sick, you get treated as a matter of what.
Except for someone that is, except for someone that is maybe
Still,
EFC is after the person, bank can go. If EFC is after the person, bank can go and stay in the hospital.
that's true. Since the lockdown, so many of them that travel abroad for health medical checkup, they're not traveling again, and they are not dying too.
Can't tell it again.
And that obviously tells us the story. Anyway, you know, they say on a lighter mood, they say that is why the map of Africa is a question mark. Because if you look at that map very well, it's a question mark because there are more questions than answers in Africa. That's why the map of Africa is a question mark. You know, so obviously we have so many actions and inactions and things in Nigeria that are counterintuitive. They defeat every known theory and law, you know. So Nigeria is not a very good example for certain things, you know. So but actually, it's not actually income dependent. It is dependent on the degree of what necessity, you know. So then we go to inferior goods. Are you aware that there are goods whose demand falls as income rises? True or false?
True, sir.
Very true. There are goods whose demand falls as income rises. For example, for those of you who go to Bend Down Boutique, you know where Bend Down Boutique is located, right?
Yeah.
Ladies will tell us better.
Under
Madam
the
Laura,
bridge.
do you know where Bend Down Boutique is?
Under Guaripa Bridge.
Okay, where is it located in Lagos?
I don't know. I don't live in Lagos.
Do you have any Lagos person?
Swani Market.
Okay. Okay. But then when you begin to earn income at a certain level, you do your shopping in Dubai, you know, and elsewhere, right?
Gucci.
You know that yeah, somebody is even mentioning the name. They begin to ask you, who do you wear? Not what do you wear. I begin to hear, I wear Gucci, I wear this one. Which one again? Please, ladies, help us. All right, whatever. the point I'm making here is that the demand for certain class of goods would obviously fall as income what rises. When that happens, such a commodity is considered what? Inferior. It's not inferior in the sense of quality. It is inferior in the sense of being consumed more by people at certain level of what income. At least there are very key staple food like agege bread. you know when your income rises, you leave agege alone. That's like, hello.
So what about the Jebu Gary?
uh you can tell me more. There are goods whose income, whose demand will fall as the consumer gets into a higher income what bracket. At certain income level, you can afford to go for red meat. uh At least let there be an animal in the pot of soup. Mhm. But when your income rises, you would de-emphasize red meat, and you begin to hear things like white meat because of the low is it cholesterol level, less fatty meat and all that. That's because income has risen. So such class of goods are called what? Inferior what? Goods. They are goods whose demand falls as income what? Rises. Meaning that the demand for such goods um, would have what? Um, higher, when there's a higher income, the demand goes what? Lower. Then the third class of goods would be goods we call ostentatious goods or luxury goods. These are class of goods. These are class of goods that are used to display affluence. They are class of goods that are used to display what? Affluence. They are class goods. They are rival goods. There are goods that have consumer exclusion. Goods that have what? Consumer exclusion. And they are also like status symbol. Are you seeing me on my screen? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so like these ostentatious goods are these are class or classes of goods rather. Classes of goods that are used to display what? Affluence. They are class goods, they are used to show class. They are rival goods. Why do we call them rival goods? It's not everybody. There are two classes of goods here. We have rival goods and non-rival goods. And non-rival goods. Um, Give me a popular bridge in Lagos.
Third Mainland Bridge.
Okay, let's say Third Mainland Bridge. Third Mainland Bridge is a non-rival goods. You don't need to climb Third Mainland Bridge on the basis of your wealth. In fact, poor people even may use it more than the rich. Are you get what I'm saying? So they are non-rival. Non-rival goods are like public goods. They are public goods. They are not dependent on the consumer. third mainland. Nobody will say if you don't have a Lexus Jeep, so don't cross third mainland bridge. You can use your natural mobility to cross third mainland bridge. Someone can use his whatever to cross it. So it's independent of your earning. They are public goods or non-rival goods. But they are rival goods. Rival what? Goods. Rival goods are goods that its consumption is dependent on how much you earn. So if you can't pay for it, you can't have it. So some ostentatious goods are actually rival world goods. Like a poor man that died in plane crash. It is possible that the plane crashed into his hut and killed him, you know. Because as far as the poor man is concerned, he may not afford a ticket except to the dasham, you know. So, like boarding a flight could be a rival commodity. When they are talking about a ticket, except the person fly broom, you know, you like their rival goods. These are classes of goods that are used to display affluence. And then they have what we call consumer exclusion. Consumer exclusion because by the what will enjoy the commodity. And how do we identify them? They are identified by the fact that the demand for them gets higher as income rises. The demand for this class of goods will increase as income what increases. I don't know whether we are together. Please encourage me by telling me you're hearing me.
We can hear you, sir.
We hear you, sir.
It's not easy to teach this imaginary audience. So when you, as much as you can, give me responses. Let me know you are there.
All right.
You know, it's funny if somebody is close by and the person is hearing you talk, you will think you have gone nuts because it's not seeing someone you are discussing with. All right. So income elasticity for ostentatious goods. We know that because income rises, the percentage of change in income gets as high or even higher. So the percentage of change in demand gets as high or even higher than the percentage of change in what? Income. Income changes slightly, demand shoots up because these are ostentatious what? Commodities. So having said that, we move on. I'm not going to bother my head about calculating income elasticity. I'll expect you to go to get quickly into your manual and then have a look at my discussions on income elasticity. Then if you have questions, put them up on the page for me, and then we'll be able to address it. Maybe when next we meet, you face me with that question. So I like to very quickly leave income elasticity of demand. I think I've done as much as I would want to do here. I like to slightly discuss supply. Let's talk about supply a little bit. Can you put on the chat room for me the definition of supply? Please, everybody write on the chat room your understanding of the meaning of supply. What is supply? Tell me. Put that on the chat room. I'm there waiting. Please don't send it to me privately. Make it public. I've seen one. Supply is the available goods for sale. Quantity of goods available or in stock. Supply is the amount of goods that can be produced and sold at a given price in a given time. Supply is the goods that are available for sale at a given price and at a given time. Speak on. Okay. Is coming home. I'd like you to give attention to Tinola's definition. Take a look at Tinola's definition. Let me copy it and paste it. She said, supply is the quantity of what? Of products a seller or sellers are willing to sell at a particular price and at a given what time. Now, you know why I had to include sellers, so that you can draw a distinction between individual supply and market supply. There is individual supply, and then there is what? There is market supply. So when attention is given to what a seller offers for sale, one seller, as it were, offers for sale at a time and at a price, you're actually looking at what? Individual what? Supply. But when you're looking at what all the suppliers put together offer for sale at a time and at a price, you are looking at market supply or what? Aggregate market supply or aggregate what? Supply. All right, I'd like us to, somebody should tell me about the law of supply. I'm not going to waste too much time here. Can you go to the chat room, write for me the basic law of supply? Basic law of supply. What's the law of supply? Somebody should put it down for us on the chat room. Okay. Madam Uju says the higher the price, the higher the supply. That's the higher the quantity supplied. The higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied. And the lower the price, the lower the quantity what? Now let's relate it. Can we relate this to the consumer's objective versus the supplier's objective? The consumer's objective versus the supplier's what? Objective. You know, there's a conflict of interest here. That would take me to something, because very shortly we might have to look at the concept of market equilibrium. There's a conflict here. What is the consumer's objective? The consumer's objective is to buy at the lowest possible what? Price. Now there are some things you should note. One, the consumer is a satisfaction seeker. The consumer is what? A satisfaction what? Seeker. In other words, he is a utility seeker. You remember the basic concept of utility, that's the utility theory. Now the consumer is a satisfaction seeker, and the consumer wants satisfaction at the lowest possible cost, right? So when price rises, he is constrained from achieving his objective. Are you following me? You know, as a manager, you should have the ability to strike a balance between what the consumer wants and what the supplier wants. One the consumer is a satisfaction seeker. The consumer is what? A satisfaction seeker. And as a satisfaction seeker, he wants this satisfaction at the lowest possible what? Cost. In other words, it's like a greedy man who wants so much for so little. He wants to get so much, you know, and pay so little for that so much. That's the nature of a consumer. He's a greedy person. Then, one of the constraints to the actualization of the consumer's objective is what? Price. When price is high, it now means he will have to get this satisfaction at a higher cost. So he's constrained. And because he's constrained, he might decide not to buy as much as he would have bought when price was what? Low. The reason is simple. It's not because that price has risen. That's not his concern. His major concern is that as a utility seeker, a rise in price will make it challenging for him to get as high as the utility he wants. He wants maximum utility. So, and then he has to pay for his satisfaction. So if price is low, it means the money he has will be able to achieve for him as high satisfaction as possible. But when price becomes high, it will become challenging for him to achieve his objective of seeking satisfaction. And that's why the consumer frowns at increased prices. And he demonstrates that by buying less when price is high. And he is happy at reduced prices. And he demonstrates that by buying more when price is high. That is the consumer for you. Now this is the consumer. Now let's contrast the consumer with the what? With the supplier. Now who is a supplier? A supplier is not a satisfaction seeker. A supplier is a profit seeker. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So
sir.
what did I say? The supplier is who? Is a profit seeker. Now he wants to make as high profit as possible. He wants to make as high profit as possible. So when price rises, he is enabled to achieve his objective. And then when price falls, he is constrained from achieving his objective. Do I still have you people in this house?
Yes, sir.
Are we on the same page?
Yes, sir.
We're on the same page. We're on the same page.
I don't know whether the story is the story making sense?
Yes, sir.
Very clear, very clear.
Okay, so when we now compare these two, you will now see that the consumer has to do with what? Demand. And the supplier has to do with what? Supply. Now, this is just the law. What I've just shown you is the basis for the law of demand and the law of what? Supply. So the consumer is a satisfaction seeker. Now, and then the supplier is not a satisfaction seeker. He is a profit what? Seeker. And then the supplier wants to make as high a profit as what possible. So what happens? For the consumer, when price rises, he is what? Objective. For the supplier, when price rises, he is enabled to achieve his what? Objective. Then for the consumer, when price falls, he is enabled to achieve his what? Objective. While for the supplier, when price falls, he is constrained from achieving his what? Objective. So in the light of that, the buyer would say, the demand would say, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, and the higher the price, and the lower the price, the higher the quantity what? Demanded. And then supply will say, high price, high supply, because it is at that level that his objective of seeking profit will be enabled. Then low price, low supply, because with that, his objective of seeking profit is what? Affected. So meaning that price varies inversely with what? With quantity demanded. All these things we are saying is all things being what? Equal. All things being what? Equal. But then, remember the last time we spoke, I spoke to the objective, that's limits to the exceptions to the law of demand, you remember? Oh. Please, Onyebuchi, there's noise coming from your background. Onyebuchi, there's noise coming from your background. Is it that you control it or you mute yourself, please? All right. Then moving on, assuming I ask you a question like this, the consumer wants satisfaction at the lowest possible cost, and the supplier wants profit as a profit seeker, and this defines the law of demand and the law of what? Supply. And this is the case when all things are assumed what? Equal. Then I ask you, what are the exceptions to the law of demand and the exceptions to the law of what? Supply. These things happen, all things being equal, but it is not always the case. There are circumstances that negate the empirical law of what? Demand. There are also negate the empirical law of supply. And obviously, I've discussed with you the circumstances that that disobey the basic law of what? Demand. And there are also circumstances In other words, there are instances where price will rise and supply, try as much as you can. You cannot increase supply. True or false?
True.
Huh?
True.
Okay, now let's see such circumstances, exceptions to the law of supply. Now, assuming I'm a herdsman, let's assume I am a herdsman. People are becoming scared of herdsmen, not because of the fact that being a herdsman is a problem, but because of some things associated with herdsmen in Nigeria. Okay, but let's assume I'm a herdsman, and then the price of cattle in the market increases. Can I increase my stock of cattle almost immediately?
No, sir.
Why did you say no?
Because for you to restock, it's a process. It's not something you can do immediately with livestock.
Okay. That means the supply of livestock is exceptional.
Yes.
The supply of livestock is exceptional.
But there are cases where you can actually go and buy from locations where the cattle are cheaper and make your supplies.
Well, that's not what we are talking about. We're talking of the stock of livestock, the supply of livestock. If we believe that it is the whole quantity that products sellers are willing to offer, like let's even look at it from the sense of aggregate supply. That's market supply. Did you get the person that raised that the issue? Did you get what I just said?
Yeah, I understand.
If you look at market supply, which is referring to the aggregate cattle in the market, which can possibly be offered for what sell, even if price rises, you can't offer more than what is available, which means the supply of livestock, livestock and other goods that may follow natural process, before they are produced. Another example is the supply of labor. Do you agree with me? If the government has increased minimum wage, and then you say you want to produce labor, offer more workers so that you can earn more minimum wage. Two things are noteworthy here. Labor is a natural good, is a natural commodity, which cannot just be increased, And then also, it depends on the demand for it. You don't just throw it on the user of labor. You have to try to align the supply with the demand for it. So something like labor can be an exception to the law of what? Supply. Now let's look at something like agricultural goods. Do you agree with me? Hello?
So for agricultural goods, yes.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. So if assuming there's an increase in price of corn, you cannot just immediately increase the supply of corn because it follows a natural process. There has to be the harvest period, Then when it is after harvest, within that period, even the price may be increasing or maybe reducing even. And then let me give you a very simple example. It's almost time for fruits like mango. Am I correct? You cannot really manage the supply of mango. As it's getting ripe on the tree, they are harvesting it and bringing it to the market. If you say you won't sell, the thing will decay while you're it will get spoiled while you're keeping it. When it is the time, it is abundant, it's available. So you don't manage the supply. The supply comes naturally. So supply of agricultural goods can be very exceptional. It doesn't really follow the natural supply, natural law of supply. It doesn't follow the natural, that's the empirical law of supply. It disobeys the law of supply because the supply is not price dependent. It is weather and season dependent. In fact, agricultural goods and other seasonal goods, goods. That's another factor that can be an exception to the law of what? Supply. Another factor here can be supplier's expectation. Supplier's expectation can create an exception to the law of what? Supply. And there are two sides to supplier's expectation. One, when they expect a fall in price, and two, when they expect a rise in price. Now let's analyze these two scenarios. When suppliers expect a fall in price, how would they behave? Talk to me. Let's assume, let me create a simple scenario. Price of a commodity used to be 100 naira. For whatever reason, it got up to 100 naira. Then suddenly it drops to 80 naira. A very good example. Due to COVID-19, price of crude has been crashing and crashing. It's been coming down and not going up. I get what I'm saying. So let's assume a certain supplier took crude to the market and it's about $20 per barrel. And then this $20 per barrel is against like $25 the day before. So it was $25 the day before. And then this man came to the market the next day and found out that it is now $20 per watt barrel. Now, and he knows that price has been on the downward trajectory, And then what will a rational supplier do?
Sell off his quantity.
He would not say price has reduced from 25 to 20, therefore the lower the supply. I don't know whether you're getting that. Now, because he's expecting a further fall in what price, he offloads all that he has so that he doesn't hold on to it and price will fall more and he will suffer more what? Losses. I don't know whether you're following that. So when suppliers expect a fall in price, they offload all they have because of the fear of suffering further losses as a result of further fall in what? Price. Does it make sense? Now let's assume there's a rise in price. Then let's assume that this crude begins to recover now. Probably after you ease off the lockdown and then things are gradually returning to the way they used to be. Of course, you know where the price of crude used to be. And then gradually the market is returning to normalcy. It's becoming it's not bearish anymore. The market is a bit becoming bullish. It's trying to, price is rising. No, he just gets to the market and then price of crude has moved from 25 to 30. And the signals, the market indicators are pointing to the fact that in the next 2 or 3 days, that we may expect crude to rise to as much as what? $45 per barrel. What will a consumer? Remember, it moved from 25 to 30. The basic law of supply would say if price has increased from 25 to 30, what do? Sell more. So the higher the price, the higher the supply. But the background information at the disposal of the supplier has it that, look, in the next 48 hours, you will have price move from $30 to $45. If you were a supplier, what would you do?
You
I
hold.
will hold
Why are you holding?
so that I can sell at a profit.
People too like money.
Hello, sir. In some cases, the
Okay.
supplier will hold while still considering the cost of him holding that product. If the cost
Okay.
is, if the difference between the cost of him holding the product and him selling it immediately is not rational enough, some suppliers might be prone to still sell it at that particular price.
But
But if the
but
profit,
more but more of the suppliers, what will you think will be the preponderating majority of the suppliers?
most of them will sell it off, sir.
Most of them will sell off at 30.
No.
Most of them will hold.
Oh no, they will hold it till
Most
that
of them,
48 hours.
most of them will hold and sell at $45. Now let's take the point of what most of them will do, and then let's assume all the other conditions are right. Let's assume that all the other conditions are right. Now, you see, what I want to bring out there is that they are refusing to sell even at a higher price because there's an expectation of a further increase in what price. And this singular action disobeys the law of what supply, because the law of supply rationally says the higher the price, the higher the quantity what supplied. Okay. So that's I've given you some exceptions, some factors that can actually disobey the law of what supply. Where high price may not necessarily mean high supply, and low price may not necessarily mean low supply. I don't know whether we're on the same page.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let's try to look at some types of supply. Now some commodities may have what we call joint supply. Some commodities may have what we call competitive supply. Now, I like to talk about these two majorly. The case of joint supply and what? Competitive what? Supply. Now, when is supply said to be joint? When two or more commodities are made from the same production process. Two or more commodities come from the same production process. The commodities are considered to have what? Joint supply. Now, let me give you an instance. An instance is the supply of wool, mutton, and like leather. Yeah, leather. Now, if you kill a sheep, the edible meat of a sheep is called what?
Mutton.
If my English language is still good, that's it. Mutton. Then the fur of the sheep, not the African sheep I dey talk here. I mean good sheep. the one they feed well.
The four.
The fur, FUR is the wool. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And then the skin will be the what?
The leather.
Meaning that these three commodities can come from the same production what process, implying that they have what? Joint supply. The implication of joint supply is that an increase in the supply of one will automatically mean an increase in the supply of the what other. The more of mutton you look for, the more of wool and leather you will get, because they are byproducts of this mutton. Are you following that now? Now,
Yes.
another example could be beef, height and skin. Beef and what? Height and skin. Coming from like what? When you can come from a cow, right? Or cattle, as the case may be. Then another example is the supply of palm oil and palm kernel. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
The supply of palm oil and palm kernel is what? Is an example of joint
Joint
supply.
supply.
Because if you choose to supply more of palm oil, you will obviously supply more of what? Palm kernel, because they come from the same production process. Palm kernel could be a byproduct. It depends on the one that has the attention. You may have the main product and the byproduct. The main product and the byproduct. Are we together? So palm oil and palm kernel, they come from the same production process. It means the supply of one will, whether the supplier wants it or not, he would obviously have more of the other if he decides to have more of what? One. The supply is said to be what? Said to be joint. Can you give me another example?
Crude oil, petroleum, fuel, kerosene, and bitumen.
I think that's a good example. Like when you process crude, you have several things coming out of crude. In other words, processing that crude would obviously have several things come out from it at the same time. But it has to apply to a country that refines crude now. So not a country that sells it raw.
That's true, yes.
Say
Refining crude,
like,
yes.
yeah, refining crude. Please don't call any country. I didn't call any country.
And that one is cassava.
Okay. From cassava we have what?
Sash.
No. I would rather not
Okay.
agree. I would rather not agree with cassava.
Mhm.
I would rather we put cassava in competitive supply. You get to see what I mean shortly. Let's put cassava. We are better off with cassava in competitive supply than cassava in joint supply. Okay, now let's talk about competitive supply. In competitive supply, remember, one thing I want you to hold on to here is that in joint supply, the increase or the supply of one would mean the supply of the other. But in competitive supply, the supply of one would be a decision not to supply another. When the production or the supply of one commodity becomes a limiting factor or becomes a reason for not supplying another, such commodities are said to have competitive supply. Now, the supply of bread and cake can be competitive. Do you agree with me?
Not completely.
If I have a bag of flour, and decided to bake more of bread, will I have more of cake at the same time?
You have a stick.
Eh?
So this one is somehow because cake is quite different from bread. You can try to eat bread and cake at the same time.
No, it's not eating. Yeah, it's not demand, it's supply. Supply here means two of them are made from flour. So if you use more of the available flour to bake bread and offer to the market, you won't have more of flour available for what? Cake.
Okay.
And of course, you know that there's a more baking of bread than making of what? Cake.
Okay.
So, meaning that the supply of bread can be the reason for less supply of what? Cake. If we channeled more of the available flour to what? To bread. Now that's why I said we can put cassava here. In cassava, if you use the available cassava to process gari, you have less available for what? Fufu. Right?
Yes.
You have less available for starch. And I remember, there was a time, sometime in, was it Obasanjo's regime or something, President Obasanjo's regime, when there was a discovery of the use of cassava for some industrial purposes. If anybody can put us right, that obviously created scarcity of gari and other food that come out of cassava. If you begin to export cassava for industrial purposes, production of ethanol, biofuel, and all that, you will have less of cassava available for some other nutritional purposes. So the supply of cassava can be very, very competitive. If you channel it to one purpose, there will be less available for the other purposes. So assuming I have a bag of cassava tubers, and I decide to use that one bag in processing fufu, I won't have cassava for gari or starch. So, but if I decided to give it more to gari, I'll only have less of it available for what? Fufu, which means the supply of gari and fufu can be what? Competitive. The supply of gari, fufu, and starch can be competitive, because they come from the same source, they come from the same raw material. So when more of this is done, the less of this can really be done. Now the supply of labor can also be competitive. How? Now, the same laborer that works in a factory can work in a farm. Now, how many of you know that one of the reasons for low agricultural productivity is that there is a fall in the number of persons engaged in agriculture? Agriculture is left with the rural hands, except after the economic recession of 2016, when everybody's eye got open that you can't eat money. That you can't really eat money, but that money has a derived demand. That the demand for money is not because of the note and coin, but because of what money can buy. So, and then with the advent of this administration that banned the importation of certain food items, people are now compelled to return to agriculture. That's what I consider one of the major achievements of this government, like the advocacy for agriculture and increase domestic food production. That's key, But then when you look at labor, you find out that the same laborer that works in a factory can work in a farm. Now, due to rural-urban migration, most people that are supposed to work in the farms, most people that are supposed to work in all this rural occupation, they have migrated to the towns and cities, and then they are looking for white-collar jobs, looking for borrowing money to go and submit application instead of going to sit back at home in the villages and work in farms. That means the labor has moved from rural areas to the urban centers to do more civilized, so to speak, job, then leaving out the rural jobs without really people to factories and other modern kind of jobs actually reduces the supply of labor to what? To farms and other rural occupation. So the same laborer that works in a factory can work in a farm. So give more of the labor to the factory, there'll be less of the labor available for the what farms because labor can actually have what competitive supply. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
So these are some examples of competitive supply and joint what supply. Now I'm not going to talk about change in supply and change in quantity supplied. I'm not going to talk about shift in supply and movement along supply curve. All I expect you to do is to go back to our discussion on demand and then use that to relate to supply. Even the issue
Hello.
Hello, sir.
So we can't hear
Hello?
you.
elasticity of supply. I'm not also doing elasticity of supply. All you just have to do is to look at what we did in elasticity of demand and relate it to elasticity of supply. Now,
Supply.
for this night, I'm going to introduce the concept of market equilibrium.
Concept of market equilibrium.
Hello.
Hello?
I can't hear you, sir.
Is it talking? Is not talking.
Yes, we connect. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Concept of market equilibrium. Yeah, it's gone off.
Where does that even fall in the material?
Is it still on?
You will know that he's not talking to us because his mic is on. Support, can you help us communicate to him, please?
The doctor is still with us. Hold on, probably he's having some kind of technical issues.
Okay, sorry for the break in transmission. I'm back. Are you still with me? Sorry for the break.
Yes, sir. We are still here.
Yes,
Hello?
sir.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Please ask me your questions first. Ask me your questions first. Questions thus far. Your questions thus far. If you don't have any, you tell me now so that I can continue.
No question, sir.
No question.
No questions.
Is that conclusive or inconclusive? Is that like a kitty election?
No question.
Final answer, no question. Okay. Now let's go to. I'd like to introduce the concept of market equilibrium. This is important because it will lead us to so many things. Because when we get to market and market structure, which we will find ourselves not too long or from now, we will have a need to fall back to the knowledge we're going to acquire here. All right. Market equilibrium. Remember, there's something I tried to introduce. I tried to say earlier on. When let me do something like this. When price is high, okay, I need to create a table here. I just do this and we'll stop the next time continue. Now this is price. Here is quantity supplied. I'll just say supply. And here is demand. Okay, now high price. When price is high, what happens to supply?
It drops.
That was too quick, and you also very quickly failed it. Okay, when price is high, what happens to supply? Supply also gets what? High. And what happens to demand?
It reduces.
Demand what? Falls. Now, that would mean supply will be in excess of what? Demand. True or false?
True.
True or false?
True.
True. Now that gives us what we call excess supply. Then 2, when price is low, what happens to supply?
It reduces.
Supply gets what? Low. And then demand gets what? High. Then what happens? There will be what? Excess.
Limited supply.
Excess what? Demand. Remember, excess supply here will be what? Cure S minus what? Cure D. Do you get that? That's quantity supplied minus quantity demanded will give us what? Excess what? Supply. Now here, excess demand will be what? Cure D minus cure S. Right? Now, the concept of equilibrium comes when, between this high and low price, there could be a price where supply will not be higher than demand, and demand will not be higher than what? Supply. You know, maybe at the EP, that's the equilibrium price, what happens? Supply as high as demand, and then that's like supply that is equal to what? Equal to what? Demand, and then demand that is what? That is equal to what? Supply. So implying that no excess demand and what? No excess supply. So what's our definition of there's equilibrium when, for example, in the high, supply is higher than what? Demand. In the low, demand is higher than what? Supply. So what if we have a scenario, a condition in the market where demand is as high as supply and supply is also as low as demand? Demand is as low as supply and demand is also as high as what? Supply. In other words, they are just equal. When that happens, this is what we call market what? Equilibrium. So in essence, there are three things we should note here. Three things we should note here. Equilibrium. I will say this and stop. Equilibrium as a market condition. 2, equilibrium as a quantity. 3, equilibrium as a price. I'll start from here next time. I'll start talking about this next time. I'll just make a diagram to illustrate these three conditions. And then in the diagram, I'll also be able to show you region of excess supply and region of excess demand. So I will hold it here for tonight and we'll hope to meet with you again later in the week. Kindly ask me your questions, or in fact, tell me what you learned. I've been doing the talking and you've been doing the listening. What did you learn from this class? You know, there's this temptation of the answer to every do you understand is yes, sir. Is the teacher. So do you understand will always, you hardly will hear no, sir. Do you understand is always replied by yes, sir. And I consider that hypocritical because not everybody actually understands the discussion. But for the fear of offending the teacher, they just follow everybody and say yes, sir. Or for the fear of exposing they are not understanding, they just say yes, sir. So, but I feel differently in my class. Please tell me if you don't understand. Then if you say you understand also, then tell me what you got. Any questions? I'd be very naive to think that everything I said in this class was understood.
No questions, sir. No questions.
Okay, Chikezie, no question.
Yes, no question.
So you did well. No
Galaxy
questions, sir.
A20, any question? Laura, any question?
No questions, sir. Sir, today's class was pretty smooth. I've not slept. Sir, today's class went pretty well.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Doc, you nailed it at the head. You did well. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Edit, any question?
It has been locked down, sir.
If you any question, Ruben, Tinola,
No, sir.
Uju,
No question, sir.
Modi, any question?
No
No
question, sir.
questions, sir.
Just that I've been wondering. Whether
Modi has left, oh.
Somebody was saying something before he was rudely interrupted.
Yes, sir. I said no question, but I was just wondering whether palm oil and palm wine falls under competitive supply.
Whether what?
Palm oil and palm wine
Palm
falls
oil and
under
palm wine.
competitive.
He said palm kernel, not palm wine.
No, he was saying something. He's a local person. Let him. Okay, it does appear you're making a point, because I think if you tap the palm tree, it may not be able to produce the fruit anymore.
Yeah.
You just get the wine and you don't get the fruit.
It's under competitive.
I stand to be corrected. It's competitive.
To be competitive.
That means if you choose to get the palm wine from the palm tree, you cannot get the palm fruit from the palm tree. It does appear that's the way it goes. Please, you can take that as your assignment for those who are good in palm wine.
You are right, sir. Some of us that grow in the village, you are right, sir.
Okay. That's all right. Thank you so much for your time. I think we had a beautiful time, and we'll do it some other time. Have a great night. Stay blessed and stay safe.
Good night, sir.
You too, sir. Bye, sir.
We're on our face mask, sir.
I don't have my own, as you can see, but I stay indoors. All right.
Good night.
Good night.